OPM, which stands for other people's mortgages. Other people's mortgages. So the idea here is buying what we call cash for keys, or buying subject to the existing mortgage. Buying subject to the existing mortgage means the seller is going to transfer title. So we got the borrower, lender, deed. The borrower is going to transfer the deed to another buyer. Okay? Now, in that case, who owns the property? The buyer owns the property. Who owns the debt? The bank owns the debt, right? But is the seller off the hook for the note? No. Is the buyer on the hook for the loan? No. Because he didn't sign what? He didn't sign a note. So he has the property, he has ownership of it, and as long as he continues to make the payments on the underlying loan, then there's not going to be a problem in terms of non-payment default. So some of the advantages of buying subject to. Number one, it's no credit required. So if your if your seller is willing to do a subject, you might be wondering who in their right mind would transfer ownership of a property by a deed and stay on the mortgage. You'd be surprised who would. I tell you who would. Some guy who's 4 payments behind facing a foreclosure in 2 weeks. And their choices are foreclosure and ruin their credit forever, or risk deeding it over to someone and hoping they make the payments. Which one is a better scenario? I think the latter one is. I mean, the worst that happens is you're back in the same scenario you were in the first place. The best that happens is the buyer makes the payments and they improve your credit report for you. All right? So there's no credit required of the buyer because we're not asking the lender for permission to assume it. We're not going to call up the lender and say, I'd like to assume that loan. We're just going to take it over and not say anything and make payments to the lender. Now, there's better interest rates. Where are better interest rates, especially if you're an investor? If you took over an owner-occupied loan and you were an investor, as an investor we pay higher or lower interest rates than owner-occupied?
Advantage to the investor.
Higher. So is advantage to the investor, if you're taking over a seller who's an owner-occupied, an owner-occupant loan, you get a better interest rate and the loan paid down. If they've been paying on it for 3 or 4 years, you took advantage of that initial bulk of interest, and now you start paying down a little more principal. And there's no loan costs involved, which is great. If you're not assuming it and we're not originating a new loan, there's no points, appraisal, surveys, inspections, double appraisal, closing costs, origination fees, and all that other garbage. And there's no personal liability. And that's a good and bad thing. If you're the buyer, it's a good thing. Because if you don't pay on that loan and the property gets foreclosed, are you liable and is it on your credit report? No, it's on the seller's credit report. So if you're the seller, is that a risk to you? Absolutely, absolutely. You might want to buy it with a personal guarantee or a personal signature. Now, if this was such an ideal scenario, why don't people use this technique more often? They don't know about it, that's one. So trust the new buyer to make the payments, but I wouldn't, as a seller, necessarily give the deed up, but if you're the buyer or representing a buyer, and the seller's in foreclosure or the seller just wants out, and you say, hey, transfer it over to me, and I'll give you X amount of dollars cash for keys, what's the only problem?